To delve more about the topic, we are joined by CORE Indonesia Executive Director Mohammad Faisal. Pak Faisal, thank you so much for joining us
You're
here.
welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's been a while now. From your perspective, what's driving this record low inflation? Does the low inflation indicate a strong economy, or is it the demand or is it the supply that impacting the...
Well, obviously there are a number of factors that driving the low inflation. One of them, if we look at what happened in the world today, not just in Indonesia, but in America, in China, the inflation is quite, slowing or declining, especially in China. It's very low inflation, and that drives commodity prices to stay low or even slightly declining. And that means that will impact on domestic prices as well. Okay. So Indonesia is one of the exporters of commodities, of course. So that's the influence of the global conditions. But if you look at the economy domestically, there is also something about demand that is quite strong correlations with the inflations. Say the middle income class, the rate of spending, and then if we look at also the stability of living costs in urban areas, for example, is also quite stagnating. So the middle class influence on domestic consumption is very high. So that's why whenever there's a problem with middle income spending, that will impact on low inflation in Indonesia.
Now, from the data from Statistics Indonesia that we saw last week, one of the almost 50% of the inflation is actually caused by the food, the tobacco, so
that's right.
It's basic needs.
Yeah.
Now, is that a good thing, or like is that something we need to pay close attention to?
Yeah, there's some difference if you look at the recent inflation in January, for example, because there's a slight increase in terms of volatile food, which is the food prices, and then also the core inflation, which is also quite increased. But the administered prices, declining because of the government policy, to cut to provide some subsidies for the middle income population, which is a good thing. Yeah, so I think that low inflation or deflation in January is good, but overall there's still a problem with demand, especially domestically. Especially how the government can stimulate the middle income class, especially to spend more. That means that an increase in volatile food is not good because it does not support the increasing of purchasing power in the overall population, especially the middle income class and the low income class.
Interesting. Now, what were the key factors that brought Indonesia inflation to its lowest since, we're talking about 1958?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but that's even lowest compared to the crisis era, like in 2020 and the COVID-19. That was about 1.60 something, 68. So that was a bit higher. So this is something unusual for developing countries like Indonesia. So some of the factors, as I said, may also because of the ability to control prices, which is a good thing. But I think the stronger factors is actually about the demand. As I said, something to do with the middle income population. So 1.57% is the lowest, is something that is an alarm, I think, for the economy, for the government also to take it very seriously, to cure the problem.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned about the the crisis in 2020, because one of the things that the government did back then was giving initiative, subsidized housing for cars and all that kind of stuff. So what do you think what do you see, what's the next step? Can we do that again here in 2025 to actually boost this middle income or to actually spend their money?
The conditions today compared to the COVID-19 crisis is slightly different because at that time we can see that there is a strong spending from the upper population, upper income population, but there is some problem with middle and poor people. So now the poor people may be is not as as cautious as the middle income population. They still get the government assistance, the bansos, the things that they receive also during the pandemic. The upper income population, the rich ones, they spend quite healthily, but now the middle income is still the problem, which was not the case during the early pandemic or even before the pandemic. So the cure for the problem is really have to be adjusted, to the specific middle income population, or to be more specific, as I investigated more, is actually those who have the monthly spending about 4 million per capita or less. Yeah.
All right. So it's the middle income that we're looking into
Today, yes,
right.
especially. Yeah.
So explain to me here a little bit. Is there a risk of deflation or economic stagnation if the inflation stays too low for too long?
Yeah. Well, it depends on what is the factors.
Okay.
If the low inflation is driven by the ability to control prices while the demand is strong, I think that's a good sign for the economy. Meaning that the economy is efficient, it's low living costs for the consumers and low production costs for the industry. But if the problem is more about the demand, the slow demand or the weakening demand, I think that's something unhealthy for the economy. That means that for the industry, for business there's less perspective, for profitability in terms of the business. And that what happens if we look at, for example, Japan, who experienced low inflation for so long, and that makes the population and also the business player to be more cautious, to invest or to move forward.
Yes.
So that's as an impact of low inflation for such a long time.
All right, so let me make sure I get this. So it's not a matter of like good or bad when inflation or deflation happen.
But
depends. Like what caused the inflation,
That's
or
right.
the low inflation or the deflation itself.
That's right.
So if we're talking about the supply is actually staying low, but the demand still high, then
that's a good thing. That's positive.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, aside from inflation, what other economic indicators need to be considered to understand for Indonesia overall economic health? Like, can we just focus on inflation, or we need to, like, what other factors are we looking at?
Of course, there are a number of other indicators that we have to see, and that also includes not only the GDP growth, but also, the spending or the growth of spending of each of the populations. Because aggregate, overall the GDP growth may be quite okay. Maybe there is some signs of slowing down, this year, maybe less than 5%, but overall close to 5%. But if we look at the distribution, there's some problems, in the middle and also in the lower income population that cannot be reflected. You can just see from the overall numbers. So that's why we have to look at the details really, and how about the distribution, how about the say, for example, the impacts on the investments, for example, because low spending also impacts on business profitability, and that means also impact on the prospects of investment or investing in Indonesia.
Right,
Yeah.
That's interesting. You mentioned GDP. You're talking about investment, and of course, like the GDP is impacted by how much the inflation, and then of course how much foreign investment actually
That's
coming
right.
in.
Yeah.
Now, let's shift our attention a little bit to JCI and then how much the foreign investment we've been experiencing during the Bay rate cut. We saw higher prices for the big fours and like blue chips on the JCI. Now we've been experiencing the past 4 or 5 days. We've been seeing a decline, especially on the JCI. So, what causing that, and then like how can we build that confidence back for foreign investors to come into the country?
I think it's really the market's really on looking at the fundamental of the economy. So the government, especially the ones who's the one who the party who take the first step, to cure the problems, is to look at the fundamentals of the economy, because even though, for example, there are some incentives or incentives in terms of the policy. Say, for example, recently the Bank of Indonesia, lowering or cutting the rates, which should be responded by the market, but it's short-lived, because the fundamental of the economy, the demand especially, there's still some problems with that, and that has to be responded by fiscal policy. So monetary policy cannot work properly without the support of the fiscal policy. So that's why budget cut for this year's government's APBN is really something that is seriously need to be responded, needs to be managed, because otherwise it will impact on the overall economy. It will make the monetary policy loosening, doesn't really effective. It's not really effective, and that also we're afraid that many of the targets, government targets, cannot be achieved.
Now, one of the headlines for today is Trump 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. So, if I'm not mistaken, the investment minister, Pak Rosan Ruslani, also mentioned like this is an opportunity for us to actually grab that market. That Now, how do you see that play out for the country and like for bringing investment coming to Indonesia?
Yeah, the interesting part with the Trump 2.0 is that he's not only focusing on China. He's also focusing on other countries that contributes to the U.S. trade deficit, including Mexico, Canada, and also Vietnam. And we look at China and Vietnam. They are the countries that have some similarities with our exports commodities.
Yes.
You know, so that's why if Chinese products and Vietnam's product to the other extent, you know, got the higher barriers to enter the U.S. market, then that means that it's an opportunity for other countries as their competitors, including Indonesia.
Yes.
So there's really an opportunity. But this opportunity needs to be grabbed, and it's not something that is, you know, automatically given. So the government needs to, you know, respond with proper policies, you know, and including the strategy, how to take advantage of this opportunity and enter, increase the penetration of our exports to the U.S., and also about investment, the prospect of investment, especially the relocation, potential relocation of manufacturing from China, which may not only see Vietnam anymore. They also need to see other countries, including Indonesia. But again, this is something that the government needs to, you know, respond properly with policies. So it's not automatically.
All right, Pak Faisal, thank you so much for sharing with us here on See Today.
You're welcome.
See you again in a better condition with what's going on right now in the country. All right, that was our conversation on Indonesia's record low inflation rate and many others. For today's Business Talk, you can stay connected with us on Instagram, X, and YouTube. Our handle is @CTodayNews. We are also available online at ctodaynews.com. Let's stay connected. Thanks so much.
Sama-sama.